What's up, world? It's your man, MrSan44Man, seen in over 100 plus countries around the world. And you're tuned into the Detroit Raw Show, only on YouTube and also on Social Cam.
Over my head, I see trouble.
Montgomery, Alabama, 1960. City of the famous bus boycott.
I see trouble in the air.
The Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, whose pastor was Martin Luther King. Officers of the peace, citizens of Montgomery, waiting as Negroes prepare to march on the municipal building in support of sit-ins who demonstrate against lunch counter segregation. This is Monroe, North Carolina. The town where local NAACP president Robert Williams created headlines when he said, "Sometimes violence must be met with violence." Many asked why.
Because some of the people who had thought that it would be better to settle these cases violently, I had been able to persuade them that we should use the courts and go into the courts. So this thing had boomeranged, being held responsible for having brought these cases to court. There was a trial where a Negro maid had been kicked down a flight of stairs by a white man, and that this man hadn't even bothered to come to his own trial, and that he had also been acquitted. And there was a demonstration as a result of this in the courtroom by the Negro women of the community, and they had approached me and had said, well, you said that you would see that these people would be punished because through the organization we would have competent counsel, and that if it hadn't been for you, that these people would have been punished. And they wanted to know what I would recommend that they do from then on. And so I recommended that they meet violence with violence, that Negroes must be prepared to repulse attacks, that they must be willing to fight, that they must be willing to die and to kill if necessary, that there was no law and no 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution of equal protection in the South, and that therefore they didn't have any deterrent, so they would have to create the deterrent force themselves by meeting violence with violence.
Nightmares are not the sole property of Southern sleepers. This is Brooklyn, New York, where headlines tell of repeated incidents of police brutality.
Perhaps I'm not the right person to talk about this case, but I feel it so deeply and so closely that I'll not rest until somebody pays for the death of Al Garrett, were he my brother. I'm angry about a number of things, not only about Edward Silver, the district attorney of this county, who has thus far failed to arrest the policeman who shot him to death, but I'm angry with a lot of my Negro brethren who don't even get angry about the fact that a poor man lies dead in his grave tonight.
Attorney Thomas Russell Jones deplores the slaying.
Killed as a result of a policeman's bullet fired at him while he was in custody in the 79th precinct on Gates Avenue. This man who had not even committed any crime, he failed to put a bottle or trash in a can. And this trigger-happy cop took him in, marched him into the police station. And there's some testimony that as Al Garrett was being marched to the police station, he suddenly put up his hands and said, "Oh, you're not going to do that to me," and marched holding his hands all the way to the precinct. Anybody who's been a Negro for long knows what that means. Any man here in this room knows what you do, why you do a thing like that.
Greenville, South Carolina. In this church, whose pastor is J.S. Hall, a group protests the treatment accorded Jackie Robinson at the local airport. Local NAACP President A.J. Wittenberg describes the incident.
The manager of this airport told them that this was not the waiting room for Negroes, that the one around at the back at the side. Mr. Robinson came and told them that he was an interstate passenger, that segregation was unlawful. Then he summons the policeman and told the policeman, if these Negroes sit down, arrest them. Mr. Robinson said to this manager, that if I sit down, will you really arrest me and I'm an interstate passenger? He readily said yes. He said, you a Negro, aren't you?
Walk together, children, don't get weary. Walk together, children, don't.
They are marching on the airport.
Walk together, children, don't get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Going to mold and never tire. Hold and never tire.
Words of protest are read there as a group remains outside singing.
There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Walk together, children.
Youths march in the streets of the nation's capital, petitioning for integrated schools.
Walk together, children.
From America,
thousands of white faces intermingle like the waters of a river, I see only one face. That is the face of the future. Unprecedented gathering of young people. I cannot help thinking that 100 years from now, the historians will be calling this not the Beat generation, but the generation of integration.
Today, people of all races may sit at a public lunch counter and enjoy a meal. Imagine not being able to eat inside of a restaurant simply because of your skin color. As recently as 40 years ago, many public eating establishments in our nation were for whites only. Keeping the races apart was not limited to restaurants. A legalized system of discrimination known as Jim Crow was established in the southern states in the 1880s and continued into the 1960s. Through violence and intimidation, the rights of blacks as citizens were limited or denied. In almost all aspects of life, segregation, or the separation of the races, was required in public areas. Blacks and whites were generally prohibited from sharing the same beaches, swimming in the same pools, riding in the same elevators, or riding in the same taxis. In most instances, they were forbidden from sharing the same waiting rooms at bus or train terminals, or sitting next to each other on trains, buses, boats, or in movie theaters and courtrooms. Blacks and whites were seldom allowed to share the same jail cells or be buried in the same cemeteries. There were laws against intermarrying. When Mr. and Mrs. Richard Perry Loving, an interracial couple, lived together as man and wife in Virginia, they were arrested for a felony and faced up to 5 years in prison. Today, an individual may live wherever he or she chooses. However, during the segregation period, blacks in some areas were forced to reside in well-defined boundaries. Prior to the United States Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954, blacks and whites seldom attended the same public schools. Even after the Supreme Court's decision, public schools were not immediately integrated. In Palm Beach County, Florida, for example, it took almost 2 decades to integrate the public schools. The late attorney William Meredith Holland, a quiet giant, yet persistent and skillful, along with attorneys I.C. Smith, Malcolm Cunningham, and others, spent the better part of their lives filing and arguing cases in court. Due to their efforts, integration of our local public school system became a reality in the 1970s. Just as devastating to blacks during the Jim Crow period was the denial of equal employment opportunities and the right to vote. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution made the former slave citizens. In 1870, the 15th Amendment prohibited the states from denying citizens the right to vote because of their race. Yet, almost 100 years later, blacks were still being intimidated and threatened at the ballot box. Some even lost their lives by simply attempting to register to vote. While segregation was legal in the southern states, social practices in many parts of the country established that blacks and whites were to be kept apart. For example, segregation existed in Boston, California, and Chicago.